A new form of capitalism that puts people and the planet first. And that was the message of this week's World Economic Forum virtual Davos agenda, which tackled the task of rebuilding the world after COVID-19. So what is this new form of capitalism, and what are the chances the world will work together on it? And why are environmental issues at the top of the Economic Forum's agenda? Joining me today from Yunnan via Skype, Thomas Gehl, ChildWise International President and Environmental Advisor to former President Bill Clinton. Liu Zhiqin, Senior Research Fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies, and Juliet Mann, Business Correspondent in London. Welcome to the program to all of you. Juliet, let me start with you. We've relied on your reporting to know what's going on at the Davos agenda, and the Davos agenda highlighted stakeholder capitalism, which calls for shifting business away from just profits. What does that mean exactly? Because it doesn't sound easy. Will businesses have the incentives to do that?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because Davos is always full of these acronyms and complicated concepts. Actually, it's quite simple. Think about it like this. For decades, the business and financial world's been dominated by a bit of a tunnel vision, making profits, growing their bottom line. But the World Economic Forum has been talking about something else. In fact, since its inception 50 years ago, it's been bubbling away in the background. But now this concept is gaining traction. The idea is that the worlds of business and finance need more lateral vision. They need to look at all people who've got a stake in the way the world works. So sure, investors, employers, but also the employees, the customers, and wider society. So what this is about is redefining business models for the future to make them more sustainable, to make them more inclusive. Now, you'll know that lots of lip service has been paid to going green, to sustainability, to innovation, just for innovation's sake. But the pandemic, that has been a real shock to the system. And so what we've seen is it's accelerated the pace of technological change, of digital change across sectors and across regions. And there really seems to be some momentum now building behind this concept of building back better, balancing profits with people, with the environment, and being relentless about that. So perhaps this year really does mark a shift in focus from the investor community. Now, there was one anecdote which I thought was quite interesting. It was from the UK government's Alok Sharma, and he was talking about the change in attitude of finance companies. Now, he's part of the UK government now. He's part of the organising team for COP26, the big climate summit later in the year. And he said, 25 years ago, he worked in banking. And thinking of the world and the mindset then, talking about climate risk would seem pretty inconceivable. There would have been maybe a handful of his peers that have turned up at the table. But now, those same bankers wouldn't think about not being part of the conversation. And in preliminary discussions about COP, he said these meetings were absolutely packed. So the scale of the challenge is huge. But as John Kerry, the US climate envoy, said, it's not enough now talking about what the world's willing to do, like what was outlined at the Paris Accord, the one that the US rejoined, which is one of the Biden administration's climate actions. But now it's about what we need to do. So there's a real acknowledgement of that, because now we know more.
Absolutely. How times have changed. And now that we're on the topic of climate and concerted efforts to tackle climate issues, there was also talk of putting the planet before profits. Why do you think environmental issues have taken, in a way, center stage at this annual economic gathering? And will world leaders put aside political differences to address the issue together?
Well, they're very determined. Are they prepared? Well, that's probably still a work in progress. Climate and the future of climate change, it's always been a huge theme of Davos meeting. It's been bumped off the top of the agenda because of COVID, but it's all very interconnected. Most of the sessions touch on COVID, on climate, and on cooperation, that key collaboration. The big problem is that different countries, different regions, different companies, they all have different frameworks, different regulatory frameworks and ways of doing things. So that's why the conversation needs to continue, because everyone's got to get on the same page. I mean, today, King Abdullah of Jordan, he said, he called for a move away from the politics to practicality, so for countries to talk to each other in dignity and start the new phase of what the world should look like after COVID-19. So there does seem to be a shift of seeing the political will as a renewable resource. And so in terms of the climate agenda, well, the thrust is this World Economic Forum's mission, the mission possible concept. So this is, heavy industry, all the ones that contribute the most to global greenhouse emissions. So, aviation, truck building, shipping, energy. Now, they're now pledging to get on a path to carbon neutrality this decade. This is huge. So countries are stepping up. And the pandemic, now, that's been a public health emergency, but there's been a lot of talk, too, in all of the special addresses from the European Commission's Ursula von der Leyen to Russia's Vladimir Putin to Germany's Angela Merkel, about there being a communications crisis as well. They're calling it an infodemic, if you like. So the world of social media and fake news, that's polluted, and the world needs to clean that up too, to collaborate on regulatory regimes, on tax regimes for big tech. We need to act quickly. So there's lots of discussion at the World Economic Forum about who's responsible for social media, who's responsible for big tech. And there's something, growing debate too about what the future holds, the future of money. Now, you'll know China's been a front runner in the drive to create a digital currency. Now, the Eurozone, Japan, Switzerland, and central banks, they're all talking about building their own. So blockchain, perhaps that's maybe going to be a future replacement for the US dollar as the reserve currency of choice. And all of this plays into those three concepts.
And not just interest in acronyms, but always new terms to understand. The Davos is known for brainstorming ideas, solutions, and possibilities. We'll keep watching. CGTN's Juliet, Mann, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed there on the Davos agenda. And gentlemen, I'm coming to you next. Mr. Zhiqin, let me start with you. The International Monetary Fund expects a global growth rate of 5.5% this year in 2021, but the World Bank warned that the global economy could be heading for a decade of disappointing growth outcomes. So one of them puts a forecast for this year, relatively short term. Another has an outlook for long-term economic forecasts globally. Which one of these do you find more possible, more relevant? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, in my opinion, that both judgment or forecasting for the economic growth this year is possible, right, especially for IMF, is quite more optimistic. I think that both international organizations, they have different aspects to make the forecast. Normally, these two international organizations, when they have the foreseen or the forecast for the future economic growth, are quite conservative and very objective. But this year, I think the World Bank is more conservative, has something like to disappointing outcome for this year. I think from the World Bank has its own aspect to make such a conclusion, because I think he are mainly more or less that concentrated in the emerging market, especially for the emerging market. They have suffered a lot from the pandemic outbreak. So under economic growth pressure, and also the restructuring in some countries are still underway. So they cannot fulfill all these targets of the economic growth. Of course, from the developed countries also, they have their problems and challenges, especially the uncertainties of these countries are still there. Not find the right way to solve, especially for European countries. Some pandemic outbreak is still under very serious conditions. So from both sides, I think they're quite very optimistic, but quite conservative, especially for the growth rate in China is quite positive, 8.1. So this is a good booster for international economy community. So I hope that we can do better than the forecaster.
Mr. Gehl, can I get your thoughts first on world economic recovery in general? We, of course, don't have a clear-cut timeline of when this pandemic will finally end. We don't know when mass vaccinations will work to bring the pandemic to an end. Hence our conflicted understanding and sometimes predictions about where the world economy will go. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There are a lot of contradictory indicators that are out there, but I think that what the World Bank is looking at is to be able to dig ourselves out of the pandemic arena. We have to go into substantial debt, and that debt will weigh us down over the next decade. So I think that they agree that there will be consistent performance on the GDP, but that will still, now in the last year and probably for the next year, we'll have to incur substantial debt to be able to really get each economy going in every country.
Mr. Liu, several speakers at the forum said the post-COVID recovery will depend on developing countries, but we also know that the gap between developing and developed countries has been driven deeper and wider by this pandemic. Who will be leading the economic recovery post-pandemic?
I hope that the world global economies are looking at China's performance in this year and also in the fight against the pandemic. As we know, China has played a very important and positive role in the fight against a pandemic outbreak and also for the resumption of business activities in the world. Of course, China has achieved a very excellent outcome. Two unique. One unique is that China is the only developed or the major country that has the positive growth last year. And the secondly is also China's FDI last year became the #1, the largest destination for international investment. For these two figures and effects that we can show that the world economy recovery also depends on developing countries and major countries that especially like China. We have already restructured our economic system also in order to meet the new demands and the challenges from outside. Especially we have improved our business environment also to attract more business investment. So in this way, the whole world and the global economy could be some relaxing that we have a good driving force and even a good booster from China, from the emerging
Understood.
market.
Mr. Gehl, this will be in your department. The WEF's Global Risks Report, released on January 15th, stressed that for the first time in the history of the Global Risks Perception Survey, environmental concerns dominate the top long-term risks. And at the agenda, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for action to avert climate catastrophe and to build an equitable, sustainable future. We, of course, hope that fighting climate change and helping the economy recover to be two parallel tracks. But in reality, will climate issues inevitably take a back seat until the pandemic is done and over?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that I've been involved in the environmental arena for over 30 years, and now the environmental time has come. Not only because by doing things correctly with an eye on the environmental impacts, you can save money for your company, because every time you release a pollutant, that means you have a raw material that you ineffectively processed in your operations. So now, when we need to recover and we need to rebuild our factories and our economy, we can do it correctly. We can do it with an eye on this wastefulness that has been going on for 50 years and really achieve a much higher level of efficiency in our manufacturing process and optimize all of the advantages we have right now. This has been a game changer because of the pandemic, and now it creates a real opportunity to do things correctly.
We don't have a lot of time left. One final question for you, Mr. Gehl. China and the U.S., the world's two largest emitters of greenhouse gases, have both pledged to significantly reduce emissions by 2050 and 2060, respectively. What does it take for the two giants to achieve that goal? Will they cooperate on this issue? Is this an area where a breakthrough in now very icy relations could be seen with the new Biden administration?
Absolutely. I think that it's such a refreshing change to have the Biden administration in. I was fortunate enough to work in the Clinton administration for environmental issues, and to see it come back to people who truly understand the importance and the impact of it will be a game changer. I've been a big fan of President Xi and his ambitions. The last 3 5-year plans have all included environmental. The last 2 have put environmental in the number 1 or number 2 spot. So I believe China will achieve their 2060 goals of zero emissions. And I believe with America now ready to put their foot to the pedal, that they too will be able to achieve their 2050 goals of doing it. And it is needed for the world. And I think the leaders together, we can lead to a great new future.
Both countries will be better off achieving those goals. We share in your optimism
Absolutely.
and your hopes. My thanks to Thomas Gehl, Zhiqin, and Juliet Mann. Thank you so much for joining me today.